So, good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on where you are joining us from today. And we'd like to wish all an early happy Darshan Day, as tomorrow is the mother's 143rd birth anniversary. And we're announcing that in honor of this occasion, we'll be hosting a global Zoom gathering in which 12 different centers, ashrams, and individuals from America, Europe, India, and Singapore will be joining in unity. The event will begin here on the East Coast of America at 9 a.m. and in India at 7:30 p.m. So we hope you all can join us for this very special occasion, and each of you will be receiving an invitation email in the next couple hours to the event. So welcome all also to New Perspectives, an integral yoga platform sponsored by Aro University in Surat, India, and the Sri Aurobindo Integral Life Center in Surat, and also here in Fountain Inn, South Carolina. I am joined by my colleague, Dr. Vladimir Yatsenko, moderator for today's webinar, and our esteemed speaker, Dr. Ananda Reddy, who we are greatly honored to have you with us here today, Dr. Reddy. Welcome. In January, New Perspectives launched a series of talks on the topic consciousness. This series included nearly a dozen webinars from integral yoga experts on the transformation of consciousness. Today, we begin a new series, The Evolution of Consciousness, a topic Dr. Basu introduced in his New Perspectives webinar review and Q&A sessions a couple weeks ago. As the title of this webinar indicates, the evolution of consciousness is the hallmark of Sri Aurobindo's integral yoga. Sri Aurobindo says, evolution in its essence is not the development of a more and more organized body or a more and more efficient life. These are only its machinery and outer circumstances. Evolution is a strife of a consciousness somnambulated in matter, to wake and be free and find and possess itself and all its possibilities to the very utmost and widest, to the very last and highest. Evolution is the emancipation of a self-revealing soul, secret and form and force, the slow becoming of a Godhead, the growth of a spirit. So we are very much looking forward today to Dr. Reddy's talk on the subject of evolution of consciousness. And at this time, Dr. Vladimir Yatsenko will more formally introduce Dr. Reddy and open the New Perspective Forum. I'd just like to remind participants to please post your questions for Dr. Reddy in the Q&A box during the webinar rather than the chat box. Thank you. Vladimir?
Yes, thank you, Radhe. Yes, I'm very happy to welcome today Dr. Ananda Reddy, who is a good friend, and I had a privilege to study in his center, Sakar, and acquired my PhD through his center. So he's Sri Aurobindo Center for Advanced Research. So Ananda Reddy is a former student of Sri Aurobindo Ashram School in Pondicherry. From 58 to 69, he traveled to many parts of the world, spreading the fragrance of Sri Aurobindo's and Mother's consciousness. Ananda now heads the Sri Aurobindo Center of Advanced Research located in Pondicherry, and he conducts research and online courses in Sri Aurobindo's thought. For details, you can contact www.sakar.in. Today's topic is on evolution of consciousness, the hallmark of Sri Aurobindo's integral yoga. Evolution is of a double process, outer and inner, collective and individual, extensive and intensive. This approach to evolution is fundamental to Sri Aurobindo's integral philosophy and yoga. It ties up the ancient and modern ideas on evolution of consciousness, as well as that of the physical body. In fact, the physical body is viewed as an embodiment of consciousness and its faculties. So the concept of the evolution of consciousness runs through all Sri Aurobindo's major works. for it opens up to the vision and possibility of the coming of the supramental stage in the evolution of the human race. So without further ado, I invite Dr. Ananda Reddy to address the audience. Please, Ananda.
Thank you. Namaste, everyone. Well, it's a privilege to be conducting this webinar in collaboration with Lagras, where again, as Vladimir said, I have very many old friends, especially H.P. Rama. I have not seen the present center, but I've seen H.P. Rama's other centers, and I can relive my memories when I speak to you. Well, when I was invited for this topic, evolution of consciousness, I did not know exactly what I should be speaking. Because normally it is a concept pretty much well known to all the Aurobindo scholars and those who read his books. So I want to see it in a new light. So let me start first of all, what exactly do we mean by consciousness? Because that's a definition that has been understood and misunderstood and non-understood perhaps. Because normally when we say the word consciousness, we mean it to be aware, to be alert, or to be awake. So in a normal terminology, it means awareness, waking awareness, etc. But I was a bit surprised to read Sri Aurobindo, who denounces this definition, saying, but this vulgar and shallow idea of the nature of consciousness, though it still colors our ordinary thought and associations, must now definitely disappear out of philosophical thinking. So that gave me a little bit of a clue. That's not a normal thing that to say awake, being awake and aware and all that. So look at it, it says must now definitely disappear out of philosophical thinking. So now what does Sri Aurobindo mean? Well, Sri Aurobindo has written in many, many volumes and in chapters in Life Divine and all his books. But I found a very simple definition given by the mother. Someone, like any one of us, asked the mother, sweet mother, please tell me the meaning of consciousness. A direct question. And her answer, without consciousness, you would not even know that you live. Consciousness is the faculty of becoming aware of anything through identification. When the Lord becomes conscious of himself, the world is created. Consciousness is the breath that gives life to all. But this is a very simple definition. But further, she gives a very beautiful comparison, an image. She says it can be said that this river is a good symbol of life, that what is constant in the river is the species water. It's not always the same drop of water, but it is always water. Without water, there would be no river. And what endures in the human being is a species consciousness. So now with all these things put together, it becomes clear that just as the water makes what is a river, the whole content, the subject is the species, as she says, water. So also this entire world, the very definition of world is consciousness. Just as like a river cannot exist without water, so too the world and this creation and this manifestation and this universe and this cosmos, whatever you want to call it, is nothing but consciousness. Maybe in different grades, in different substance, in different strata. But essentially, as the mother points out, every drop is different, but all drops go to make the river. So that makes it very clear that how consciousness is the essence, and without consciousness, there's no form. Having given the definition of the concept of consciousness, we take up next the question of what we have all known when we speak about evolution of consciousness, the concept of involution and evolution. Now, here is where I started thinking a little differently. Is this concept of evolution, this concept of involution and evolution, a philosophic concept? Normally, we all think it's a philosophic idea that Sri Aurobindo has given in humans, in Ideal of Human Unity or in Life Divine, etc. But I, for one, tend to think that it is not really belonging to philosophy. It's not a philosophical concept. It's on the contrary, an integral part of his yoga. How do we say that? Well, it's an integral part of yoga because what is Sri Aurobindo's ideal? It is to turn this mortal world into a mortal body into an immortal body, into this life into a life divine, into a transformation of this entire being. So what he is looking for is a charter, is a map, is a roadmap to bring about, to fulfill his ideal of transformation. Transformation of the outer nature, transformation of the body, life and mind, etc. So what is essential is this goal of yoga. How do we transform these three elements of the lower hemisphere? Because these, as I said, are the refractions of Sat Chit and Ananda. So his entire theme was, how do we get back there? So through yoga, through whatever it is. And while in search for this path of transformation and, as we say, return to the origin, there comes in as an aid this concept of involution and evolution. So we should really understand it in the right perspective. And now I understand why Sri Aurobindo said, I'm not a philosopher. Well, philosophy is not the main thing for him. Philosophy is only an addenda. It only helps you to understand what is the path of his yoga. So I would say that this entire concept of evolution, involution, etc., is only a part and parcel of his own integral yoga. You see, in the beginning, when he started his yoga, he gave a definition of what is the object of his yoga: to become one with God, to be divine and live a divine life is the first object of yoga. The second object is to know God in himself and in ourselves and in everything. So it's not sufficient to know and realize the divine, but we have to also know his manifestation, his forms, the forms of consciousness. So these are the two main things, but he adds a third one. He says what is important is to be one with the divine will and work as its instrument. Because one thing is you may know this world, you may love this world as a form of the divine, but that's not sufficient. There's a kind of a passive love. We have to have this kind of an instrumentation for affecting the divine will in this world. So that's the third object. And the fourth object, of course, most wonderfully, he puts it, is to enjoy God in all beings, in all things, and in all that happens. You see, this is a kind of a full ideal. To be one with the divine, to love the creations of the divine, to be instrument of the divine for the transformation and the betterment of this earth, and all that done through delight, not through compulsion or coercion or a kind of a punishment. So this becomes a wonderful integral ideal, but that's not sufficient. This is what he had aimed in the beginning of his yoga in 1914 or 1910 even. But later on, toward the middle of his life, he seems to give us a new definition, wherein he would say that the divine life will reject nothing that is capable of divinization. You see, he has gone a step ahead. He wants to have a divinization of this life and not just a question of realizing the divine. And what does it mean by the divinization? Well, the mind must rise towards and into the supramental light. This is what I was telling you about how to take this mind, life, and body, the lower elements, towards their source. So the mind must turn towards the supramental light and truth. And then similarly, our life must feel all its urges and instincts exalted and irradiated and become a glorious counterpart of the supramental super life. So all the time you see is connecting mind, life, and even the body, he would say, the physical consciousness and physical body itself must reach a perfection in all that it is and does, which now we can hardly conceive. This is the integral transformation of the outer nature of the instrumentation. So you see, this is this ideal, and now he has set up this ideal, not only of being an instrument, etc., but the transformation, the ideal of transformation. So it is more to rationalize it. I would put it more to rationalize and put it logically, that it gives us the theory of involution and evolution. Otherwise, if this was not the aim of yoga, perhaps this theory of involution and evolution would not have been necessary. Perhaps, I'm saying it's not really the right way, but what I'm trying to do is emphasizing the yoga aspect. That is why he calls life divine as the metaphysical aspect of the synthesis of yoga. So this is where he comes into picture and he says, what exactly is this involution and evolution? It's essentially the question of the spirit descending into matter and matter ascending into spirit. The process of materializing the spirit and spiritualizing matter. The materializing the spirit is the involution, and spiritualizing matter is evolution. In this process of spiritualizing matter, that's what we conceive as the evolution of consciousness. In a little paragraph in the Life Divine, right in the very first chapter, he puts it this way. He says, we speak of the evolution of life in matter, the evolution of mind in matter, but evolution is a word merely states the phenomenon without explaining it. So this, you can see, it hits at the science, at scientific methodology, scientific discoveries. We have been all speaking about, the great theories of evolution, etc. But Sri Aurobindo says, they don't tell us why about it. They only tell us the how of it. So the question is, how did life come about through matter? Or how was mind born out of life? So obviously, science cannot tell us the how of it. They only tell us the process. So Sri Aurobindo is very definite. He says, unless and until we accept the Vedantic theory, so what is the Vedantic solution? That life is already involved in matter. The word involved tells you the question of the involution. This question of life is involved in matter, and mind is also involved in matter. So this question of involving the prior existence, the pre-existence, the intrinsic existence of each principle in matter is the truth. Of what? Is the truth of evolution. Because they're already embedded in that through this time, through millions of years, each of these aspects is coming up. From matter that came life, and life comes out of that mind, etc. And then Sri Aurobindo puts it very gently, and then there seems to be little objection. Look at his words. If this is the logic of evolution, why should we object? If we were to say a further step to admit that mental consciousness may itself be only a form and a veil of higher states which are beyond mind. So logically we cannot deny it. If we have accepted the very fact that from matter came life and life comes mind, so why should we stop evolution at this point? So you would say, as the impulse towards mind ranges from the more sensitive reactions of life in the metal and the plant up to its full organization in man, so in man himself there's the same ascending series, the preparation, if nothing more, of a higher and diviner life. This is where we start our discussion. I've given a little bit of a background to tell us that how things have come up to the level of mind. And now Shivananda will say, the animal is a living laboratory in which nature has, it is said, worked out man. This is one of the most crucial sentences in the first chapter of the Life Divine. But as most of you know, the Life Divine is again, the first chapter is again the synopsis of this entire book of the Life Divine. So when it's almost a prophetic sentence, it says here, the animal is a living laboratory in which nature has, it is said, worked out man. Man himself may well be a thinking and living laboratory, in whom and with those conscious cooperation, she wills to work out the Superman, the God. Or shall we not say, rather, to manifest God. But here you must have noted one thing, that the living laboratory in whom and with whose conscious cooperation, this word whose conscious cooperation is nothing but conscious yoga. So this is how Sri Aurobindo brings in this aspect of yoga. And it is this conscious cooperation of man that will hasten the descent, or as he puts it, the manifestation of God as the Superman. So this has been his theory of evolution and evolution, involution and evolution. But as I told you, it's not a theory, philosophic theory, but it is an aim and the end of his integral yoga. But one thing that we realize again is, up until the evolution of man, the mind, there has been only an emphasis on force, energy, tapas. Consciousness was always at the back. But it's only with the coming of man, coming of the mind, that this question of the consciousness comes forefront. That is why Sri Aurobindo uses the word, with the conscious cooperation, there will be the coming of Superman. So now this is where we see what is this conscious cooperation required of man. And then in this conscious cooperation, there are two things. And here is something that comes about that I need to add here. Now, what do it mean by this conscious cooperation? Sri Aurobindo again tells us that in this conscious cooperation, there's a double process of evolution. So when we speak about the evolution of consciousness, we have only a philosophic little backdrop of involution and evolution. It's not important. It's important to the extent it explains only yoga, but not by itself. Now, by itself, what is happening? There is a double evolution. Double evolution means there's a double process. One, the outward visible process of physical evolution with birth as its machinery. Very simple. Outer visible evolution with birth as its machinery. For each evolved form of the body housing its own evolved power of consciousness is maintained. And then we see, and kept in continuity by heredity. So to summarize, there is an outer evolution, a visible evolution, which goes forward by birth and heredity. This is what we call the outer evolution. And similarly, There's an invisible process of soul evolution with rebirth into ascending grades of form and consciousness as its machinery. A wonderful clarity. The outer body evolution or the physical evolution and the inner soul evolution. The outer evolution goes to the extent through the process of birth. And here we can see what is this outer evolution. It's basically a collective evolution. So what we see in the history of the world, in the cultural history of the nations and cultures all over the world, from the ancient times to present times, there has been a very rigorous and wonderful outer evolution. Of course, in this outer evolution, we see so many events, historical events that have happened. And each event has come up, had its great day, the heyday as we say, and then it declined. So one thing we understand is just as we individuals also we grow up, grow mature, and then decline and then die and leave the body. So collectively also the same rhythm. It's not just for my individual body. There's also a collective body, be it the kingdoms or the kings or the great empires, anything. So the outer thing only gives a push and furtherance to what was there in a few centuries back or a few decades back. So that is a visible thing, which is written most in history books, be it science or cooperation or business or empire building or anything, even literature, music, everywhere. But then that is not sufficient. There is an inner evolution where rebirth becomes the central point. Because you would say, this is an indispensable condition for any long duration and evolution of the individual being in the earth existence. You see, without this rebirth, there would be no evolution of the individual soul. So how do we put them together? We put them together because he would say, it is the individual who grows in his consciousness from birth to birth. And this growth of the consciousness of the individual is one that really leads the collectivity. So there is this synthesis, synchronicism between the individual and the collectivity. So most of the people, the world over, they think only of the collective progress, collective evolution. And we think that great nations have done this and they have been great scientific, etc. But it's a very peculiar thing we have seen in India. Of course, most of the cultures must be having, I have no idea, but I can speak about India. There has been a tremendous external evolution and progress in all its branches, be it science, occultism, everything. But it has been always spearheaded by yogis, by spiritual masters, by those individual souls who have always given us the lead. So we see, Sri Aurobindo would say, each life becomes a step in a victory over matter by a greater progression of consciousness. So here we see the ultimate purpose of this rebirth, the progress of the soul. What is it? It's not only to give a leadership, a direction to the collective progress, but this is what is marvelous with Sri Aurobindo, they would say, that each birth is not only an evolution and a progression of the form, but in each birth the soul itself comes into the matter and transforms it. Maybe transformation is a big word, but affects it, injects it with the truth, with the spirit of the Supreme Divine. This is what is important to say, that there is already from millennia, from the moment of creation of matter and life, etc., there's been already a journey of the return of matter to the spirit. And imagine this return of matter has taken billions of years. And yet, the journey will continue until and unless this matter itself is transformed or returns to that original level of the spirit. So now we see the combination of the individual, the invisible, founded upon soul birth, and on the outer level, the visible, the collective, and based on birth. So remember two words, birth and rebirth, individual and collective, visible and invisible. This is what is very much emphasized by Sri Aurobindo. And there we can see a beautiful synthesis of yoga and the outer life. How he connects yoga with the transformation of the outer. You see, any growth and progression of only the outer would become a lopsided growth. And mankind may commit suicide because one side becomes too heavy. And this is one of the things that India, with all its spirituality, has been balancing the East and the West, the outer growth and the inner growth. Without a country like India, with all its spirituality, providing this basic spiritual growth, the world would have gone but astray. There would have been too much and only too much of the outer, and the direction of humanity would have been lost. And now Sri Aurobindo adds a new direction to this inner growth. Because he would say we get lost because the outer growth is so much faster, that if it cannot be transformed in time, if it cannot be transformed and changed into a kind of a connectivity with the inner, the world would have no direction and it would lose its existence. But how do we change the outer? You would say there have been many saints and yogis and bhaktas and everything and philosophies and all that. But Sri Aurobindo for one realizes that unless and until we bring in a higher consciousness, a consciousness beyond the mind, a consciousness beyond the overmind, this outer level, outer life will no more progress. It has progressed perhaps even in spite of the balancing act. Although in India we have said there has been the descent of the overmind, descent of the other levels of the mind. There has been some kind of a semblance of a balance, but now the balance may overturn if a force and a consciousness beyond mind does not come, beyond the overmind is not brought in. This was the main concern of Sri Aurobindo. How to bring in a power forceful enough, a consciousness powerful enough, which can counter this tremendous march of the outer civilization. You call it artificial intelligence, you call it technology, you call whatever it is, mobiles and everything. We can see humanity going mad with this thing. And nowadays, all that is happening in the techno world. It's frightening to see how we have become stooges and puppets in the hands of this technology. Our lives have lost their meaning. It is already technology is covering us, controlling us. So if it goes further, you can imagine we would all become living robots. You don't have to create a new robot. We ourselves are becoming more or less robots. So this danger, to avoid this danger, Sri Aurobindo brings in this question of the possibility of the supermind. That's why he did this entire tapasya for so many years, to bring in this higher force, only to save humanity. Well, now coming back to this evolution of consciousness, the outer part of it, as I told you, there's one, the outer, the other one is the inner. The outer one, Sri Aurobindo would say, since the beginning of history, since the beginning of his cultural history, humanity has taken 4 steps. First, religion. It all started with religion in one form or the other. You may call it barbaric, you may call it anything you want. There could be umpteen descriptions of religion. But there's been some kind of a, with all its rituals and ceremonies and sacraments, it has been essential for humanity to start moving in the right direction. Religion has its own growth, but apart from the material growth, religion has tried to hold on to some kind of a truth. It has had many creeds and ceremonies and rituals, but those are necessary at a stage of evolution. They were necessary. And Sri Aurobindo says after religion comes occultism. That's again a spiritual aim at its goal. It has tried to master the invisible. Religion was still on the visible level of earth and life. Although they dealt with heaven and hell and all that, still occultism comes in, a science that was really beyond this earth. And the third stage, Sri Aurobindo would say, is the stage of spiritual philosophy. A spiritual philosophy leaned on religion as its support or its way to experience. It has been the outcome of realization and experience. You see, now we are in the midst of the spiritual philosophy, wherein lots of thinkers, lots of yogis, lots of saints have contributed a kind of a spiritual philosophy. How much is followed? That's a different question. But you see, from the earth level, that is religion, occult level, that's the non-visible. Then comes the spiritual philosophy. It's a spiritual philosophy of life, which connects both the occult and the material. But that's not sufficient. You see, most of us, how many philosophers? We have hundreds of philosophies. You go to a bookstore, you've got philosophers, you've got spiritual philosophy, spiritual thinking everywhere. But then, that is not the aim or the end of evolution. So we are going into the next step, what Sri Aurobindo envisages as a spiritual experience. So this spiritual experience has used all the three means at a starting point. So the spiritual experience starts with religion. So there's nothing wrong with religion. We are all to start with that. Some kind of a belief, some kind of ritual is good. Then we come to the occultism. Then we come to spiritual philosophy. We begin to search the direction of our life. We can't jump into spiritual philosophy on day one. We have to use these three methods and then surpass all these things. So this is what, in general, humanity has done. So he is sure to speak about these four levels, and then he would say, this is this level that has been taking place. This is the evolution that has been taking place. And now, there is a specific rhythm. In all the four, what was the process of this evolution? What is the methodology of this evolution? And here, I take recourse to a great yogi, Nolinikanta Gupta. He has given us, squeezed out of the main thought of Sri Aurobindo, a very simple process. He says there are two things that happen. That is, one is the intensive, and the other is the extensive. Now, what are these things? He says there is this evolution through processes of a single personality, number one, and which is an impersonal movement, sometimes through many personalities, sometimes through a few outstanding personalities, sometimes quite anonymously. What does it mean? That in all movements of spiritual progress, or material progress, or psychological progress, in any way, cultural, art, everything, it is always the individual who takes the lead. That's why it's called the intensive movement. And sometimes in religion, in spirituality, there are always these great yogis, avatars, vibhutis, etc., etc. In politics, political visionaries are there. In art and science, there are great critics are there. So first, it's the individual who takes up the movement, and then we see that this individual, he who imbibes in himself a new idea, a new thought, a new inspiration, he kind of becomes the gatherer of these great ideas. But then he doesn't keep for himself. He then distributes. So there is a kind of an extensive movement that takes place. So this is the extension and the largeness that happens. So in all political movements, every movement that you see is always there's a leader. And the leader, he may be living for 10 years or 30 years or 50 years, doesn't matter. But he has got a higher truth. Truth on any level is not necessarily always a spiritual truth. It could be something on the politics or science or anything. But things follow by an extensive movement. So this has been the rhythm, be it in religion or occultism or spiritual philosophy or spiritual experience, everywhere. The rhythm is same. Individual to collectivity, intensive to extensive. And it's these extensive movements that become the movements. Sometimes the movements end up in revolt, in revolution, in all these things, in violence. The means are different. Sometimes it will be a peaceful march expansion. We have again a wonderful example in India, how through centuries it has extended its religion, its spirituality through all the Eastern countries that we know of, China or Japan or Cambodia, anything, Sri Lanka. It has had a very peaceful extension. There's been no war, no battle to extend. But there have been other moments in other countries where we have had a forceful expansion by sword, by killing, by conversion. So this is a movement that happens, unfortunately or fortunately, by one way or the other, but there's an extensive movement. And in modern times, we see this movement of extension happening very much with a great speed. So it is, and every extension movement encompasses all nations. And we cannot be any more isolated. Any movement that happens in any one corner, we have been experiencing this in the last couple of year and a half. There's some virus in some country created by somebody, we don't know who, etc. But you see, the pandemic. Within months together, the whole world has come into a pandemic. So nobody can escape. No part of the world could escape that. So this is the way every movement now is becoming a universal, a cosmic extension. So this is one of the advantages or the disadvantages. But in this movement, if we can add a spiritual individual movement, it will also find its expansion and extension. This is where comes to Ananda's vision of a new creation, of a new society, of a new town, the township represented by Oroville, as would say. So this is where the individuals have to take up the effort. Be it just a center, an individual's creating a little ashram. So how much India is strewn with ashrams. There could be one disciple or 50 disciples or 500 disciples or 5,000 disciples. But this is how there is always an evolution of consciousness from one level to the other. So this has been the rhythm of the outer evolution. But then I said, there's also a rhythm of the inner. So this inner evolution, it comes in, as Mother and Sri Aurobindo always hold, by a change of consciousness. It is not by any external activity. It is only by a change of consciousness. So the individual has to try this effort, give this effort of change of one's own consciousness. And one's own consciousness has nothing to do with the outer activity. In the sense, you can be a businessman, you can be an artist, you can be a plumber, you can be a farmer, anything. That has nothing to do. It's all thing is within oneself. How does it come about? Mother tells there are many ways that this change of consciousness can happen. One of the first things is, first of all, we live in a very horizontal consciousness, where we do not see any kind of an elan except our little vital arrangements, vital kick-ups. But then she would say, in some, not in all. In some people, there's a kind of a shifting upwards. And instead of seeing things horizontally, you see something from a higher consciousness. In the sense, if you're looking at down from an aeroplane or from a balloon, for example, it's a beautiful experience one could have. You go up in the sky and look down. So you don't see the details, but you don't see each detail. But you have a kind of a sense of unity. It's the same thing. If one can rise in one's consciousness, all the details where there is antagonism, where there is violence, there is torture, where there is cruelty, you go beyond. And in that sense of the beyondness, somehow all these individual clashes, they merge, they evaporate. You have a sense of a unity. And perhaps that is how the world, the vision of a great yogi is that of Unitarian vision. He doesn't get into the nitty-gritty of who is which party and that which religion or which caste, nothing. And then there could be, Mother would say, there's another experience, the opposite side, which could be again a plunging into one's own depth. And there's a kind of an inner silence and inner calm. And then what happens is suddenly you start losing importance of the outer things, the circumstances. They all get kind of distanced. And then you see greater identity with your own deeper self. So either there's a distancing, we say, I'm no more interested in that. There's a change of value system, change of looking at things. And then they would say, yes, I now find a true value something else. And then there is a third possibility. The third possibility is a sense of, where the sense of limitation disappears if you go a little deeper. And that little deeper is a long distance, although we call it a little deeper. The long distance is the touch with the psychic being. But there what happens, we have always seen there's a perception of duration is lost. You're not worried about time. You're not worried about this thing, what will happen tomorrow. Am I going to live 30 years, 80 years? The sense of these limitations of time go away. You have the feeling that it's an eternity, that I have always been there and I will be there for eternity. So the sense of the eternity comes in, and then this kind of a movement can take hold of not all. Here is what is remarkable. Mother would say, for all those who are destined to find their inner being, at least one moment in their life there would be, which comes like a lightning flash, and either this overview comes in, or a depth comes in, or a psychic touch comes in, and that changes this entire life. But all those who are destined to realize have had this at least once. So that's a very big thing. Not everyone, we should not grudge saying, oh, I haven't had these moments of change, of transformation. But there are some people who have already had some kind of a past karma, past evolution. And in this life, there does come a moment of this destiny, as we say. Well, maybe what we all could do, those are destined or not destined, is at least try to approach the third element of psychic contact. And that is the real, true inner evolution of consciousness. And for that, I think the best thing I can do is only to read out something from the Mother. How to find the soul. To find the soul, you must go like this, gesture of plunging, like this, draw back from the surface, dive deep and enter, go down, down, down into a deep hole, where deep, silent, immobile, and there's a kind of something warm, quiet, rich in substance, and very still, very full, like a sense of sweetness. That is the soul. And if you persist and are conscious, then there comes a kind of plenitude that gives feeling of something You feel that many secrets would be revealed, like the reflection in very peaceful waters of something eternal, and you no longer feel limited by time. You have the impression that you have always been and will be for eternity, and that liberates you from bondage to outer forms. This is one of the most beautiful things. You see, we speak about detachment, being away from all this, negative things of anger and this and that. That's all big things. Mother has shown this simple, not the simple, but this shortcut to all this cleansing or purification, as you would say, it's only the inner that can take away this, liberates you from bondage to outer forms. You no longer feel that you live only because you have a body. You see, the importance of the body, the importance of the outer thing, the importance of material things, all that changes. All things are there. But how do we get sudden detachment? It's a question of, you know, Shwayamanda does not say do not desire. Shwayamanda would not say do not detach. There's no question of detachment. What do you do then? Well, he has spoken about detachment and non-desire in many books, synthesis, etc. But what does it mean? Detachment is attachment with the soul. Desire for the outer thing is desire for the divine. So there must be a desire, but to the proper person. A detachment with the attachment with the proper thing. So that is what the mother would say, that this distances you from these outer attachments, these outer forms. And only when one has made an effort or inner development, then there is something that happens, and then you say, I've been existing in this world since eternity. Well, that's a long story, but this is what I've looked at, this question of evolution of consciousness. So basically, what I would say is, it's not a theory. Evolution of consciousness may look philosophic, but essentially it belongs to integral yoga. Because Sri Aurobindo was interested in seeing how to go about a new path which can change this humanity, the outer and the inner. So this change of humanity can be done with the supermind alone. So he was interested more in finding and bringing down and manifesting the supramental consciousness. And that is his main idea. So rest of the theories are only supports, explanations. And when we saw that there is an outer and an inner evolution, the outer has its own progress, the intensive, extensive religion, etc. And the inner is the spiritual, is the yoga. So without this yoga, without this individual progress, the outer collective progress may become detrimental and suicidal at a point in humanity. So this is how we look at this entire problem of evolution of consciousness. So it cannot be done independently. This is to be done both by the individual and the collective. And it's only one helps the other. So kind of a little overview I've tried to give to you in this short time. I hope I've been able to convey something, because I don't want to accept this theory of involution and evolution as a purely philosophic concept compared to other philosophies of evolution, etc. Because many people have done that. We had in the West a great philosopher who has said about evolution, it's all that. But my idea has changed to say that the entire philosophy of Sri Aurobindo is only a scaffolding, a support to this integral yoga. That's why he's a great master yogi and not a philosopher, as he himself told us in many ways. Thank you very much. If you have any questions in the remaining times, if I can take any one or two questions, I'll be happy to take.
Thank you, Ananda. It was beautiful synthesis of inner and outer evolution. And I always had, may I ask you one question, which I actually didn't resolve yet. I had always a question about inner and outer evolution and couldn't resolve. I always thought that inner evolution determines the outer, so to say. But there is a kind of double process. There is simultaneous process of both. So to say, there is outer evolution as it is from species to species, which nature develops anyhow, whether we are involved in it and evolving through it or not. Or maybe it is a longer process. And if there would be no involvement of the psychic, suppose, then evolution would take billions of years from species to species by nature. But this involvement of the psychic changes the whole structure or the whole view on evolution and adds the element which speeds up the whole process and makes it very different. So I was thinking about this Dvipad and Chatushpad of the Veda, which Sri Aurobindo comments as Dvipad is exactly this psychic connected to the unborn self as a projection, and Chatushpad as from level to level, nature evolves from physical to vital, from vital to mental. She creates her species and so on. And not necessarily on the psychic ground. She does it as if by herself, as it were. So the question was always, is the inner presence necessary for the evolution of the outer form, or they go parallel ways? It's a difficult question.
Just one word I missed in the beginning is what is the
Is this evolution double process going in a
yeah
parallel way, or it is totally determined by the inner involution or by the inner
yeah.
self present there?
Uh, yeah. You see, what you have said is basically true and applicable only when there is a kind of a change of level of consciousness and a new species comes in. What Sri Aurobindo explains is, very well, you have also read all that, is that when there's got to be an evolution beyond mind, that means a new consciousness comes in, and that new consciousness, call it the supermental, will begin or will necessitate or will be, the new consciousness will need a new body. That's true.
Yes.
That the new consciousness, we call it supermind, would require a new form. You call it whatever, the human form or whatever. But within the human species itself, within this humanity, what we have got in the new species beyond the animal, in this is what Sri Aurobindo is discussing about the double evolution. So it's not that the outer form is definitely dependent on the inner in this range of the human level. So here is what he's speaking about the double evolution. But when we go beyond the mental and to the new species, there perhaps yes, the inner must take the lead, and according to the consciousness, nature will give a body suitable. That's what the mother would say when it came to the question of the mind. Because the mental consciousness came first, that nature had to provide a sufficiently strong body to be able to lodge this mental consciousness. Similarly, when supermind is coming or has come, not yet settled perhaps, with the supermind, a new body will be given, and the prototype of the new body has been done by mother's mother. So that prototype is already made. But by the time it comes as a part of a general evolution, human evolution, it may take centuries. So what I want to clarify once again is, within the human species, the outer and the inner, they're going independent, birth and rebirth and rebirth. So that is why many people may be just born to do some outer work and not very being conscious of the inner progress. But we must also understand that somebody just an artist or a plumber or architect, it doesn't mean that he is not evolving. Because we also remember that each person has come for a specific purpose. It's a psychic being which has taken up that kind of an experience. So with or without his knowledge, the psychic being is fulfilling its purpose, if not entirely, but somewhat. So with or without anybody's knowledge, the inner progress is happening. But what Sri Aurobindo brings into focus is that this thought, which was not there before, of this double evolution is what he has emphasized. But it doesn't mean that only the yogis or the sadhaks or those who are the spiritual path, and they alone are eligible for an inner progress. No, they are more conscious of their inner progress. Others may not be, but the soul does evolve with or without anybody's being conscious of. So it's the species difference. Mind does come with a new body, Superman does come with a new body. And in both the levels, in one place, Mother says, it is she who provided the prototype. It's a prototype of the human body also. It was she in evolution who came first and given us the prototype, which nature had only to imitate. So she says, nature needs some kind of a prototype. And that was the mother's role, to bring in the human body. And again, it's no wonder that she is again the first person to have given us the prototype of the supramental body for nature to follow, imitate. This is, copying, if not a copying, at least be inspired by it. So this is the way where you are right. It's only a question of the leap of this species.
Beautiful, beautiful. Thank you. About prototype is a very beautiful idea. There are more questions here. Dear Ananda Reddy, how do you look at what is happening in the world with the COVID-19 pandemic?
How did we look?
How do you look at it?
Do you look at the COVID-19?
Yeah, it is. Well, it's a bit of a mixed feeling. You see, when it happened in the beginning, I thought nature or the divine is working towards a quick means to change humanity, human consciousness. Because the mother did mention that it is through a crisis that humanity will change. If it does not change, it will crash. So in the beginning, when it happened, in its worst period, I thought here is that change that is really being enforced, because we have not really listened to nature. We have not been open to nature and higher consciousness. So divine has its own ways. Because I always took the inspiration from Sri Aurobindo's writings when he explained about the world wars. He said that was the best means that nature could take up in order to change human psychology, human mind. And he, for one, explains that nature doesn't hesitate in violent means or peaceful means in order to break the national egos or the individual egos. And it has given us sufficient time to mold ourselves. If humanity doesn't listen, as Mother would say, if it is not ready to be spiritualized, it will have to face consequences. So Sri Aurobindo explains both the wars in that sequence, saying, because we are so rigid in our consciousness, the national consciousness or the individual consciousness, that nature brought in this tremendous holocaust of the wars. So, and then sometimes he wrote in the Librarian first chapter itself, also all of you know, that nature uses sometimes very contradictory methods, apparently contradictory. We think, oh, there's a big war. But then what happened after the second war? The immense progress that has taken place on the material level, the new consciousness, the new awakening, and unity, etc. So I felt in the beginning that maybe this will be a big change on the level of the consciousness. Well, of course, I know on the physical level, the material level, the great loss of life, the great loss of energy, the great loss of economic, etc. I'm aware of the outer changes. But we have yet to see, has it impacted the human consciousness? Because as I see, once we return to the outer level of really getting back to business, getting back to your outer needs and necessities, will the consciousness also get back into that? Saying, okay, old methods are coming back. So now it's too early for us to really to predict exactly what has happened is right or wrong, if it has really changed and if it will take us forward. But some people say, yes, we have had some kind of an inner thinking. At least there's been a kind of a peep into the reality of our life, the purpose of our life, and the human emotional basis has been changed. But it's only years later that we'll know the true picture. So we cannot, at least I for one, do not have a specific opinion. I've been observing only, and it's for the future to decide what's happened. Because I always looked at the Spanish flu, it seems, where again lakhs and lakhs of people died. But did it change the human consciousness? And if so, in what ways? So the same thing, this pandemic also has killed lakhs of people. So in what way will it impact the human consciousness? Because on the other level, we do know that geopolitical level, there's a lot of change. Different countries have come together. Humanity is taking bigger blocks. And as Shravanda had predicted in Idea of Human Unity also, there could be different unities. Like he talked about the European Union, he talks about other unions. And where he says there could be all kind of a conglomeration. And today we see the Quad. One side USA, India, Australia, and others. So this is a strange kind of a combination of unification that's taking place. So it's too early, Vladimir, to form any kind of an opinion. It's only we have to watch and see. And what's the divine purpose? I think we do not have that consciousness to be able to see that future.
Thank you. Very nice. And there is one more question. Does competition in collective outer life in any way aids or rather impedes the collective inner evolution?
Whether it impedes competition.
The competition in collective outer life, like countries.
In outer collective.
Yeah, the competition, yes, it is on the outer level, purely on the expansion of the outer ego, it is helpful. Because this kind of a competition gives a kind of a fillip to move forward, to enlarge, to do something greater. What we say in Shravanda language, ego is the helper. So this kind of a competition is what is giving us the ego is the helper. So on the material progress, I think we need this competition. We need this kind of a kick of the vital or the ego. Otherwise, we have this kind of a tamas, lethargy. People will not move forward. So this competition has come in a good way. But the only thing that I would say is it is running out its time. Because now when we have to move towards the unification of the world in some way or the other, so there has to be less a question of competition because, again, as the mother would always tell us, it's the national egos which are the cause of this catastrophe that are happening. So if each country competes with each other, then our delay of unification would be there. There will be greater delay, more and more delay. So ego is the bar, ego is the helper. So now this question of ego is the helper, ego is the bar. So in the near future, in the next decade or two, we have to pull down this question of competition. Otherwise, this unification will be delayed, and thereby this human ideal will also be delayed. So it is on that level, I would say competition, the utility of competition.
Wonderful. Can we say there is a question, is evolution unconscious progress, whereas yoga is conscious progress? Is it so? Evolution as unconscious progress and yoga is conscious progress.
Conscious progress, evolution unconscious progress.
Yeah. Evolution is apparently unconscious. There's nothing called unconscious progress. Because this outer unconsciousness, behind that there is the divine consciousness, which is in fact playing out this entire role, this entire progress. There's a supreme consciousness which is directing this consciousness of Prakriti or nature or the outer movement. So there's nothing unconscious. The divine is there behind every movement, every growth, every consciousness. So we cannot say this is unconscious, but the only thing is, apparently it is unconscious, And because it is apparently unconscious, it's a question of time lag that takes place. That's the only difference. You see, if Supermind was not brought in by Sri Aurobindo a few years back, nature would have brought it out. But it would have taken, as Sri Aurobindo would say, maybe 50,000 years. The conscious yoga has brought it down to 30 years. So nature's yoga is also conscious, but it takes a huge time, and Mother would say there's a wastage that takes place. Wastage of human lives, of terror, of destruction, etc. But definitely, because before man came into yoga, do you think nature has not progressed from matter to life and life to mind? It took only a huge time. Length of time is incredible. But with the conscious collaboration of the human being called yoga, the only thing is the process of evolution is hastened. We are not adding anything to it. We are only shortening the time. So I would not accept that there's an unconscious evolution, because according to the Vedanta, nothing is beyond the realm of the divine consciousness. All is planned, and especially even in Sri Aurobindo, Supermind has, in its first stage, when you say there's a master plan called Supermind, it has all these things. Only thing it has left free to man is the time factor. So tomorrow man may not be there, but evolution will go exceed man and go to the next species. So friends, my only conclusion is this: apparently it is unconscious, nature is unconscious, evolution is unconscious. But let's not forget that the divine consciousness is always there, driving nature, individuals through the process. Only we can be there, only to hasten and shorten this portion of evolution. And that is the purpose of yoga. Yoga, when we say the conscious evolution, consciousness only to the extent of making this progress faster. That's the only difference. Otherwise, we cannot remove this Vedantic theory that the divine is there behind all things, everything. Apparently unconscious, apparently violent, apparently this way, that. So that's the thing that I would look at it.
Thank you. Thank you very much. If some panelists would like to ask something because they can't really post their questions, so please, that would be concluding our session.
Okay? What the questions are over?
There is the question which you already answered. How can we enhance inner evolution in current times? And that is the last question. How can we enhance inner evolution in current time?
How can we enhance the inner evolution?
In current times.
Inner evolution in current times, yeah. You see, Sri Aurobindo had mentioned, as I quoted from him to say, there is the 4 stages we saw that common humanity is taking up: religion, occultism, spiritual philosophy, and spiritual experience. And if we can at least turn basically to inner philosophy, spiritual philosophy, instead of really being lost in all the other philosophies of materialism, turn to the spiritual philosophy where at least we see a new vision of life, a new understanding of man. And after that, once you are kind of taken up with one philosophy or the other, be Sri Aurobindo, be whatever the philosophy, at least there's a turning from the materialistic philosophy to the spiritual philosophy. And once you are taken up by the spiritual philosophy, you need to focus on spiritual experience. And spiritual experience, without it, all philosophies are kind of valueless. They're verbose. They're different patterns, different words of something that doesn't mean much. But it's a stage in one's growth. So the thing is, if you want to progress in the inner growth, you have to change the view and the vision of life first. That will be given to us by some philosopher or the other. I'm not saying practice Gita or Sri Aurobindo or this. For those of us who turn to Sri Aurobindo, yes, we have the philosophy of life. But even we fall short if we do not take up the spiritual experience part of it. Sure, the mother would has a beautiful quotation in the dining room of the ashram. One drop of practice is better than an ocean of theories. That's exactly the thing. There could be ocean of spiritual philosophies, but one drop of practice is what is important. So if we can sincerely practice one thing, we don't have to be ambitious of transforming in nature, transforming the physical or the vital. That's too big a task. Just one drop of practice. And what is that one drop of practice? It's a drop which will increase into an ocean. And that drop is called surrender. If we can take up surrender to begin with, as the master would always tell us, in fact, he writes at a point that he himself has practiced this. This is question of surrender. And this question of surrender, in fact, he confirms, he assures, will take away all your problems, will do your cleansing, do the purification and all that. So the only thing is, keep faith and surrender. Keep faith and surrender. For the keeping faith and surrender, maybe it's lovely, it's a very good thing. To give you one little very practical answer to your question is to read Savitri. I mean, it may sound a little funny, some people may not believe it, but recently I've been reading Savitri, and that's what Mother emphasizes, re-emphasizes. Read Savitri and you will do yoga. It is Savitri that will bring you the highest reaches of your consciousness. So it is not a question of Sri Aurobindo or the mother or the personalities. Sometimes you may not like and not contact. But she has given a very significant, a very definitive direction saying, read Savitri if you want to do yoga, integral yoga. So I would stick to that, because that is the easiest ladder of human consciousness, where there is the earth consciousness, where the divine consciousness, where there is avataric consciousness, and where humanity is really held in full sympathy. And here is a master writer who has given so much of love to humanity, not only through characters of Savitri and Satyabhama, but the whole Savitri is imbued with the divine love. So what more do we want? So the mother was wonderful to say, read Savitri, and that's all to be done for your yoga.
Thank you, Ananda. It was wonderful to listen to you on the brink of the mother's birthday tomorrow. It's a wonderful, wonderful occasion. Thank you. And we hope to meet with you again and to engage and study with you again.
In fact, for Mother's birthday, I have given a pre-recorded talk which will be open tomorrow at 8 a.m. called the Mahavakyas of the Mother. It was my homage to the Mother. It's been a pre-recorded talk. It will be released Indian Standard Time by 8 a.m. So those of you who are interested can see, because that's exactly where I've dealt with this topic of what is to be done for this occasion of the Mother's birthday. Welcome. Thank you, dear H.P. Rama. I can see you there. I can see your study room. I know I've seen the study room maybe. So Kiran Didi there, of course, I have not seen your office, but I recognize you so good. Lovely. Vladimir, hope to see you back. Not back, but hope to see you again.
Forward.
Somewhere here at La Grasse. 3 years back, HP had invited me saying in 2022, Anand, we are digging as you say, Bhumi Puja, and you got to come to the La Grasse. I hope the grace is behind me to do all that. Thank you, HP.
Yeah,
for the wonderful work that you're doing, and may the Mother really help you fulfill your dreams. Because all our dreams are attached. You're not the only one. What I dream, what you dream, is Mother's dream. Thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you.